Hello everyone, my name's Marcellus. It's my privilege to continue our sermon series looking at the heart of Jesus. Who he is, what he's like, what moves his heart, what makes him tick. And this week we're looking at a few short verses in Hebrews 4, verse 15. It's where the writer of the Hebrews says about Jesus in relation to us. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathise with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Straight away, what I love about this is the writer says, for we do not have, and then goes on, and we'll come to those bits, but I just want to spend a few minutes reveling in that moment that we have a high priest. We have Jesus. Joel finished his sermon last week by reminding us that Jesus is the head of the body, his church, and therefore we are intimately and completely linked. That's the way that we have Jesus. In the same way that our head has a body, we are intimately and completely linked. Similarly, Jesus describes the relationship that we have with him as that of a vine and branches. He is the vine who has branches. We have a great high priest. The word have or has in the Greek is the same word that Jesus uses when he warns people, he who has ears, let them hear. So it's not like this complex or difficult thing to understand when the writer of Hebrews says we have Jesus. He just really, really means it. We have Jesus and he has us. We are intimately and completely linked. The reason that we are preaching this sermon series, looking at who Jesus is that we would see how wonderful his love is, how compassionate he is, how kind he is, and seeing how wonderful he is, we would come to him. So it's really important just to note that we have him, that he is ours and we are his. He is available to us. He's available to you. He's disposed towards you. We have him like a trunk has a branch and like a head has a body. And I suppose it is possible to have bad things as well. So it's possible to have a cold or it's possible to have a parking ticket. So the having isn't really the main question. It's actually what or who do we have? And the answer is we have Jesus. And he's the great prize of the Bible. He's the great promise. Having him and being found in him is the great promise of the whole Bible. In my own time, I'm working my way through John's Gospel, and I've been struck by how often Jesus will say, look, just come to me for everything. Everything will be found. Everything you want is found in me. He's not embarrassed by it. He says it again and again. He says, in John 6, he says, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. In John 8, he says, I am the light of the world. That's a big claim. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. In John 10, he says, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. He says in John 10, I'm the good shepherd, and the good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. He says in John 11, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, shall live. He says in John 14, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. It's pretty all-encompassing, isn't it? Jesus isn't faintly embarrassed to say, hey, if you have me, you have everything that you need for life. And not just life, but life in all its fullness. He says, come to me and experience life in me. Every good thing is found in me, which is a bold claim, and it's what this whole sermon series is based on. Remember, we're looking overall at Matthew 11 verse 28, where Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. We find rest in Jesus. And the human life's target is happiness, is satisfaction. It just is. We do the things that we think will bring us most happiness, most rest, most life, most satisfaction. So if you think that wealth will bring you happiness, then your life will be angled towards your work or your career or making money, and you'll have little time for anything else. If you think that family or relationships will bring you ultimate happiness, your life will be angled towards that. If you think pleasure and comfort will bring you ultimate happiness, will bring you life itself, your life, what you do with your time, what you do with your resources, will be angled towards that. And so what Jesus is simply doing is he's setting himself up as an alternative to all those things. And he's saying, if you want to find life, happiness, satisfaction, joy, peace, actually, it's all found in me. Which is an incredibly bold claim, isn't it? And it's one we find hard to believe, because we think, how can life and satisfaction and joy be found in a relationship with Jesus? Really, how can that be? When I'm offered comfort, wealth, sex, status, fame, achievement, experience, independence by the world. And those things seem so attractive to us. And yet Jesus says, hey, there's life in me. Now, what would usually happen now in the sermon is that I would say, hey, look, everyone, see, let's look through the empty promises of the world and let's come to Jesus. Or I'd say, who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe yourself and the world, or are you going to believe what Jesus said, the one who died on the cross for you? Therefore, come to Jesus. Or I could say, carefully consider your lives. How are you living? Do you need to change this? Do you need to change that in order to come to Jesus? And that would be biblical, and that would be fine. And if we read the text, that's exactly what happens. If you read around the text, the application comes in two commands. First, it says, "Let us hold firmly firmly to faith" at the beginning, and then it says, "Let us confidently approach God" at the end. In other words, come to Jesus. But that's not what we're doing in this sermon series. And that's not the really extraordinary thing about these verses. The really extraordinary thing about these verses is the why. Why should I come to Jesus? And it's not because he's right, but he is. And it's not because he's worthy, but he is. And it's not because he's the bread of life, but he is. And it's not because he's the light of the world, but he is. And it's not because all life is found in him, but it is. It's because of this. Listen carefully. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. There's the command. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence. There's the second command. Did you see the thing in the middle? We come to Jesus because he has empathy with us in our weakness. We come to Jesus because he knows what it's like to walk the road that we walk. He knows what it's like to be tempted as we are. He knows what it's like to be tempted to look for life in other places, in wealth, in relationships, in all the things of the world. He knows what it's like to be tempted to find comfort and fulfillment in things other than God. You see, in Jesus, we have an empathetic God. Who knows what it's like to be tired, to be rejected, to be in pain, physically and emotionally. And that seems, sometimes we get used to concepts in Christianity, but if you think about that, that is such an amazing thing. We have an empathetic God. We have a God who knows what it's like even to be rejected. That universal feeling, that thing that we've all been through, the feeling of rejection. In Jesus, we have a God who knows what it's like to be rejected. Just wonder on that for a moment. And so because of that, he is able to sympathize, to empathize, to be with you in your weaknesses, because he has drunk the bitter cup. So not only are you never alone, but you are never without Jesus, who empathizes with you, who's been there. And it's in our weakness. It's not when we've sorted ourselves out. We so often think we come to Jesus, or Jesus comes to us when we've overcome, when we've been victorious in the face of temptation. No, he is with us in our weakness, in our sin, and in our failure. He's the one who stands with us in that moment, just as much as when we're feeling victorious and great. That's why we need Bible verses like Hebrews 4:15, because we naturally think when we're weak, when we're failing, when things have gone wrong, we think Jesus is less with us than when we are doing well. But the opposite is true. The very opposite is true. We're wrong. Hebrews puts it like in the negative. He says, you don't have a high priest who's unable to empathize with your weaknesses, but we have one who's been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Because our natural inclination is to think that we have a high priest, we have Jesus, and he is wonderful and perfect and great, and yet surely he can't empathize with us in our weakness, and yet he can. And yet he can. Because he's so kind, because he's so good, because he has walked the path of pain and he's walked the path of rejection, and he empathizes with you in your weakness. And that's why you should come to him and find life, because we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin.